Hi guys, it's Danny. So today I thought we should discuss a little bit about a very common problem we all face, or most of us face, at least until we figure out how orchids work. And this is wrinkled pseudobulbs, accordion-shaped leaves, and even curly flower spikes. They all have the same thing in common. And I'll show you my examples and maybe give you some tips on how to avoid it. And yeah, I'll tell you what the cause of this is. Now, the main cause, as I see it, is dehydration in the plant. This means the orchid doesn't receive enough water, either because it doesn't have enough roots, either because it's not watered enough, or has an inappropriate pot and medium. So let's take some examples. The orchids that are prone to these sorts of trouble are actually Oncidiums, their intergenerics, Miltonias, and you can actually get wrinkled pseudobulbs on Brassia orchids as well. So, you know when people say don't overwater your plant, well, this just applies to Phalaenopsis orchids because they're the most common thing, and Phalaenopsis orchids actually like to breathe quite a lot. If a Phalaenopsis is dehydrated, the signs will not be as apparent and as unsightly as an Oncidium. Maybe the leaves will droop down quite a bit, but they will plump back up if you water it. Now, this not watering too much doesn't really apply to Oncidiums and plants like these, as I've discovered. So when you're dealing with other plants other than Phalaenopsis, I think my personal opinion is that you should use your logic more than rules, because as I have discovered, an Oncidium or Miltoniopsis will show you dehydration signs, really unsightly signs, even if you miss one day of watering. Even if you allow it to go dry for one day, what's gonna grow is gonna have a small accordion-shaped leaf that you really don't want to see. And of course, if you can live with wrinkled pseudobulbs and wrinkled leaves, you certainly will get really sad if the flower spike will be curly. So keep in mind that some orchids should not be overwatered. As long as you ensure a proper ventilation of the pot, a proper pot size and ventilation in the air, you really should not have any problems with root rot. Even if you water slightly more often, it's better for these types of orchids to be moist all the time, never go bone dry. So bend the rule slightly, apply your logic, and remember that Oncidium orchids, Miltoniopsis orchids, they're intergenerics. They're not like Phalaenopsis at all. They're actually moisture-loving plants, and they will definitely show you right away if you miss one day of watering. So this Brassia Orchid is one of the orchids that didn't have any roots when I purchased it at a discount. And when you're dealing with an orchid that doesn't have roots for various reasons, you are bound to get wrinkled leaves and pseudobulbs, maybe sometimes, but wrinkled leaves definitely when the pseudobulb develops, and also really curled up flower spikes. Now this spike used to face inwards, and this happens because the pseudobulbs don't fully open like this. The leaves don't really go to the sides because of the improper development. So this makes the development of the flower spike harder, and sometimes, or most of the times, it kind of curls up and faces inwards rather than go outside. So what you need to do when this happens is keep an eye on the orchid when you think it's about to bloom, and if you see the curled up flower spike, try to correct it, try to get it out of the leaves and try to make it point outwards. I did this using a stake and a little wire. I made the flower spike go outwards, and it developed eventually. Now you might have some slightly deformed flowers because, again, lack of moisture and hydration really tends to mutate the shape of the orchid. Now if you're dealing with this type of orchid, you're not really gonna correct the growth already affected, but you can ensure that the orchid has a good life from now on by ensuring the proper pot size and proper medium and proper hydration, and the new growths actually will get better and better as time goes by, and this situation will get corrected. It's unfortunate that you really cannot correct what's already messed up. but you do have to pay attention to the flower spikes because they will curl up. Now this Miltonidium is another perfect example of a dehydrated orchid. As you can see, some of the pseudobulbs are really wrinkly. Some of the leaves are absolutely horrible. And when I purchased it, some of the flower spikes were really curly. And I think I have some footage from back then that I will show in a corner of the screen so you see what it looked like. Some of the flower spikes I did save. I managed to pull them out of the leaves, but some I couldn't, and that is a shame. This is the major downside of dehydration. Maybe you can live with a wrinkly leaf or pseudobulb, but if the flower spikes are doomed, then it's really a shame, and this is what hurts the most actually. Waiting for a year or something for an orchid to bloom and then having to deal with really curled up flower spikes. Now I have kept this orchid really moist over the summer, and right now the flower spikes look normal. They are not curled up at all. They evolved normally, and yeah, this is the best I could do for this orchid. I will not repair the damage dehydration created. I will never be able to fix this, but I can ensure that the new growths will develop normally simply by allowing this orchid to have ventilation in the pot. This pot actually has, you know, the holes that I make, but also adequate moisture. This is the beautiful Oncidium Cherry baby that I had with a beautiful flower spike this season. Now, as you can see, it really breaks my heart to show you this, but as you can see, the new growth looks horrible. And I'll tell you what actually happened to this guy. When I received it, it didn't have a big mass of roots at all, so I decided to pot it in a slightly small pot. I think it was 1 or 2 sizes down from the standard 13 centimeter pot. Now what this orchid did was actually produce a massive amount of new growth, and that filled up the pot pretty fast and actually dried it in a matter of 1 day. Last summer I really had to water it every day. I've also used bark medium, which is okay, but it does mean you do have to water more because it doesn't stay that moist. So I would suggest, if you are dealing with a big specimen plant, let's say an Oncidium that has 3 or 4 pseudobulbs and 2 or 3 new growths, I would suggest you skip the rule of potting it in a small pot, no matter the mass of the roots, even if there are only 3 roots. Go for a decent sized pot, because you have a pretty huge plant with a lot of new growth that will produce a massive amount of roots, and those roots will soak up water faster than you can imagine, especially if there's flower spikes coming up, which tend to drain quite a bit of energy from the plant. So bend the rule of going for a small pot if the orchid doesn't have roots. Look at the orchid. Remember that the bigger the orchid, the more growth it has, the more roots it will produce. And if you do not choose a decent sized pot, you might actually have really horrible signs of dehydration when that new growth develops. So with this orchid, I opted for a mixture of bark medium and coconut husk, which retains more water, and I went up the pot size. This is a standard 13 centimeter pot, and I actually don't have any rotten roots. They are just too many of them and really dehydrated. So hopefully this new growth will start to correct soon. I have a new growth coming up here. Hopefully this guy will return to normal. So yeah, again, use your logic. The bigger the specimen, the bigger the pot, no matter if it doesn't really have too many roots. If it has a lot of growth, go with a bigger pot, because those growths will produce a massive amount of roots, especially with the Oncidiums.